welcome to our cognac discussion, our cognac chat, our cognac conversation, if you wish. My name is Dave Broom. I am a writer on spirits. People tend to think of me as just a whiskey writer or maybe a rum writer, but honestly, as I said when I went to cognac earlier this year, I do love cognac, and I've written about cognac for 20 years as well. So it's great to be here to talk about this fantastic spirit. And I'll let my esteemed colleague over here introduce himself. You probably know him already, but he might as well tell you who he is.
Hello, thanks Dave. My name's Tristan Stevenson. First and foremost, I was lucky enough to go to Cognac with Dave back in January. We had a great time, tried a lot of cognacs, and it was incredible. Which I think is why I'm so lucky for Dave to invite me to come along and help him out with this presentation today. And do a few cocktails. So I have a company called Fluid Movement, and I own a couple of bars, or co-own a couple of bars in London, most notably Pearl, and then more recently the Worship Street Whistling Shop. And at those bars we have quite a sort of strong focus on historical drinking and forward-thinking drinking, and kind of matching the two together. So hopefully my part to play in this presentation today will be combining a little bit of history of cognac cocktails, and then bringing them forward and seeing how we can affect the flavour of cognac and turn it into cocktails today that, you know, really reflect the quality of the liquid that we're using. So that's kind of what I'm hoping to achieve. But I've set myself quite a lot of targets and goals. So if I can achieve half of it, then I'll be happy.
He appears to have brought along an entire kitchen rather than just a mobile bar. So at least we'll eat well anyway, guys, as well as drinking well. Yeah. My role in this really is to put things in context. So what I think the best way to kick off really is to give you an idea of cognac history, just a quick idea of where cognac came from, why cognac. We'll break that up with a couple of drinks, and then we'll go into a little bit more techie detail about where the flavours come from, using these two samples of cognac, and hopefully then begin to build up an understanding of where flavour comes from, and once you understand where flavour comes from, how then you can use that flavour in various drinks. So I'll kick off with just an idea about cognac itself, why cognac is famous. Where did it come from? Well, it's all to do with geography initially. Cognac is a town, a city. It lies in the River Charente, and it's the highest town as far as being navigable on the River Charente. So therefore, cognac from a very, very early point in its history was a very important trading port. In other words, stuff was coming from the middle of France and could be exported along the Charente out and into the rest of the world. The first thing wasn't actually wine. First thing certainly wasn't distilled wine, which is, after all, what cognac is. It was salt. The quality of the salt was what made cognac famous initially. And so the trade started up. This is around about the 12th century. I'm not going through every single year, you'll be pleased to hear. But it started off with salt. And then that was followed, once cognac was established as a trading city, by wine. And the wine was considered of considerably high quality around about the 16th century. Bordeaux was famous, which is also on that western coast of France. It was famous for its red wines, its clarets. Cognac was more famous for its white wines. But as more wines became available to the wider population, it was realised that cognac's wines were, well, they were all right, but they weren't necessarily brilliant. However, you'll be pleased to hear there was a solution to this wine which was good, but maybe not great. And that was the discovery and the widespread use of distillation. Because cognac is the preeminent region as far as wine, distilled wine production in France is concerned, we tend to think it was the first. Actually, Armagnac distilled long before cognac did. But Armagnac, geographically, is landlocked. It's hard to get the goods out from there, out into the port, which would have been Bordeaux. So because cognac of its position and because it was an important trading centre, it became an important centre for distilled wine. I'm going to fast forward to the 18th century. By the 1720s, the Dutch were buying half the cognac which was being produced. Why were they buying it? Well, the Dutch were a great trading nation by this time. The Dutch were buying cognac or brandywine, burnt wine, boiling up the wine, burning it effectively, for fortification, to add to the water on board ships so that water wouldn't go off, so that sailors would be able to have something that was potable, something that was able to be drunk on long sea voyages. They were also transporting that distilled wine back to Holland because wine was considered a better base alcohol than grain alcohol, and then they were redistilling it into various liqueurs, etc., etc. The Dutch being fantastic and pioneering distillers. So the Dutch were looking at cognac in one way, but cognac's prestige begins in the 18th century because the English, and I would have to say the Irish, and the Scots all loved the quality of cognac. They revered it as a premium spirit. They were paying higher amounts of money, a cash premium, for cognac above other great brandies which were coming out of France. In 1710, there's an advertisement published in London saying that this cognac was suitable for drams. In other words, it could be drunk on its own. It wasn't there just for mixing. So cognac begins to build up a reputation all the way through the 18th century. And various merchant houses that we now know today are established round about them. Martel, Hennessy, Otard, Hein, Remy, all of these begin to be started at the tail end of the 18th century. And the use of cognac is changing. The use of cognac is widening, and people are looking at it in punches and in other drinks. Tris, what exactly were people drinking in 18th century?
Well, wanted to sort of look for one of the earliest cognac or brandy cocktails. A lot of the time, brandy would have just been marked brandy from cognac at that sort of stage. And really, you're talking about evolution of kind of punches, possets, syllabubs, all these kind of old school cocktails, a lot of which probably originated from England. The posset itself is a really old egg-based drink that's said to originate from East Anglia. And it would generally be ale, mead, wine, along with eggs and a bit of cream, cooked up and thickened and then served in such a way. But as distilled spirits became more available, people wanted to fortify these drinks more. And when they're creating these sort of hearty, wholesome, egg-based cocktails, such as a sort of posset or a syllabub, taking spirits that are readily available at the time are only going to increase the alcohol content and increase that kind of warm factor that you get when you come to drink it. And one of the earliest versions of this with spirits is eggnog. Now, eggnog these days often is made with rum as opposed to cognac. Sometimes it's a combination of both. And I've kind of done a little bit of research into it. The earliest kind of reference I can find to eggnog with brandy is back in 1775. Which is a long time ago. It's before we had a definition for a cocktail. And it goes something like this. A young man with a cormorant's appetite. Cormorant's a kind of bird that eats loads, by the way. I had to Google that. A young man with a cormorant appetite voraciously devoured last week at Connecticut Farms 30 raw eggs, a glass of eggnog, and another brandy sling. And this kind of inspired me to make a cognac-based eggnog today for you. And one of the first recipes for eggnog didn't actually come around until about the middle of the 19th century. But Professor Jerry Thomas wrote one down, which I've made for you today, and this is the first drink I'm going to serve. And then I'm going to swiftly move on and make a more modern version that I believe brings out some of the more subtle characteristics of cognac, which you might find strange being in a drink that's got cream, egg, spices, and all this stuff that's going to kind of press that cognac down, but I think it works. So this recipe that I found in Jerry Thomas, really, really simple. I'm not convinced it works that well, but give it a try, see what you think. So a tablespoon of sugar. There we go, that's nice. A tablespoon of water, which my other recipe doesn't contain. 1 egg, a wine glass and a half of cognac and brandy. Cognac or brandy, it says. And then 1/3 of a tumbler of milk, which isn't a great amount, really. So what you end up with pretty much is custard that has cognac in it. So I've got 4 mugs here that I'm going to serve it in. I mean, another variant of this drink, which was also in Jerry Thomas, was Tom and Jerry. Again, which is an early kind of egg-based drink. Again, sometimes made with cognac, sometimes with rum. And that sort of originated around the beginning of the 19th century. So I'm just going to pass these around, give them a swirl, enjoy your custard. And you can
Nice, I like it.
There you go. So, yeah, I wanted to do a modern interpretation of it, and I thought, well, look, the ingredients I've got here are more or less exactly the ingredients that you put in ice cream. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool to make an eggnog ice cream with cognac and try and actually bring out some of the flavours that are present within the cognac, try and actually accentuate them. So I've got my food mixer and a little bit of liquid nitrogen. I'm going to pour that in, and this can sometimes take a little while to freeze down. And it's quite interesting making alcoholic ice creams. You have to think quite a lot about what it is you're doing, because ice cream recipes at the best of times are quite complicated. You have to think about what fat you've got in there, any kind of stabilizing agents, thickening agents. Also, things like milk solids that aren't fat. That's really important as well to get that kind of moreish, full dairy flavor to your ice cream. And I've played around with a couple of different recipes for this. And the one I settled on has got quite a high fat content. Now, the reason for that is that the higher the fat content in your ice cream, the slower it melts, okay? And that slower melting affects the perception of the ice cream on the palate. And what it does is it means the flavor release is a little bit longer. And so what you should find with this drink is, food, is that you get quite a sort of length of flavor in it, which is exactly what I was trying to achieve, because it's one of the things that cognac's quite famous for, and it's also one of the sort of hot topics of discussion that we had when we were in Cognac in January. Just need a little bit more nitrogen there, it's starting to thicken up. And I'm actually going to serve it in ice cream cones as well. So I'll pass a few of those out for you. So the recipe I've used, 350 ml of milk, 150 ml of cognac, so you've got sort of 2-to-1 kind of balance there. 50 ml of cream, that was whole sort of whipping cream. 40 ml of milk powder, that's your milk solids, which is going to bring that sort of richness. And then about 80 grams of just egg yolks. The whites tend to actually water it down, so just use the yolks. Again, it's fat, it's nice, and it's tasty. So I'm just going to keep mixing this down if you want to carry on, and then I'll pass out some ice creams when they're done, okay?
Sure. I can hardly wait to eat it. How many of you are using liquid nitrogen in your bars? Yeah. Everyone should be using it. It's great. Tris has got a fantastic drink called the Smell of Fear, or had one. And this kind of reminds me of the Smell of Fear to a certain extent. You know, these insane experiments that are going on. Certainly Professor Jerry Thomas wouldn't be doing this at all, but there again, Professor Jerry Thomas thought that custard was a good drink. Was it a good drink, incidentally? Any comments about this 18th, 19th century eggnog? Any thoughts? Because what was happening with cognac was it was beginning to be used, as was proved by the use of the mention of eggnogs, etc., around the world. So it wasn't just being used there as an after-dinner spirit. They weren't necessarily just the drink trolleys getting creaked around various bars in America or France or the UK. What was happening was this wider use of cognac beginning to develop. So it was drunk as dram. So it was drunk on its own, but it was beginning to be mixed. So it was an integral part of the whole punch bowl revolution. You look back to the 18th and 19th century punch drinking songs, far less the recipes themselves. Obviously rum was vitally important, but brandy and specifically cognac, because cognac was being named as being separate because it was more expensive and considered better, because it was better, was also a major contributor to that sort of revolution as well. And as we begin to come into the 19th century, what happens is that cognac is really entering its golden age. The French like to think of the golden age as coming in the 20th century, but I think the golden age for cognac until now was the 19th century. That's when everything began to come together, mainly because the use of drink was changing. Because there's a social history behind all of this. It's not simply just production. It's about a middle class beginning to be established. It's about people using drink in a different way, not just as a medicine, not just as something to get drunk on, but something to add quality to their lives. And cognac begins to move out into the world because it has this prestigious reputation. Merchants begin initially are selling, again, predominantly to England, to Ireland, and to America, but just shipping everything in cask. A lot of the casks would then be aged in England, early landed cognac. You can still find a few early landed cognacs around. But by the middle of the 19th century and towards the tail end of the 19th century, something intriguing is beginning to happen, because rather than just shipping out casks of their cognac to merchants in London and all around the world, for these merchants to then bottle under their own label with maybe a little mention it came from Mr. Hennessy or Mr. Martell, what was happening was that the merchants themselves based in cognac were saying, we want a piece of the action. You know, why should we hand our cognac over to somebody and then get all the credit? We want some of the credit ourselves. So what you begin to see towards the tail end of the 19th century is the merchants beginning to bottle the cognacs themselves. This is important because as soon as the merchants begin to bottle cognac for themselves, what happens is that a house style begins to become established. It's no longer just Mr. Hennessy or Mr. Martell or Mr. Hine, etc., making cognac and somebody else finishing it off for them by maturing it in England or Ireland, Scotland or America. This was their responsibility from grape to bottling. And when that happens, the merchant takes ownership of what we would now call the brand. And as soon as the merchant takes ownership of the brand, so the merchant needs to differentiate his brand from his neighbour's brand. So from the 19th century onwards, what you begin to see is these huge cognac houses developing their own style and their own personality. And various other important drinks were being made. I'll let Tristan just have a little chat about his ice cream, and then we'll move on to the next drink, because the next drink is a classic, an absolute classic, which takes us across to America, where cognac was always important. Brandy was very important. Fruit brandies were important in America. First drink, first spirit, even before rum. And down in Louisiana, down in the southern part of America, the southern states of America, which are very fond of France after all. Remember, Napoleon was invited to become Emperor of New Orleans, once he was defeated. Cognac has a very important role to play in lots of early mixed drinks. So, a wee sum up of your ice cream and let's move on with another one. I'd love one. I'm getting thirsty here. Or hungry. Or whatever. Thank you.
Those who got to sample it, I'm sorry you couldn't all try it. How was it? Yeah. And you get the cognac coming through, right? It's actually quite well integrated into the food, I guess, not drink. But that was what I was trying to achieve with it, and I personally think it's quite tasty. Maybe it's ice cream flavour of the future, eggnog. There you go. So yeah, as Dave alluded to, I'm going to do the next drink now.
You had some?
Which is one of my favourite cocktails.
Have some cognac ice cream.
So the Sazerac's got quite an interesting story. It was probably invented around about the beginning of the 1850s. And it was when a guy called Sewell E. Taylor started importing a particular cognac called Sazerac. And it became available in New Orleans. At the same sort of time, a bar opened called Sazerac by a guy called Thomas Handy. And the bar changed hands a few times, but at some point, this guy, Handy, came up with, he was quite handy with cocktails, came up with a recipe for a drink called Sazerac. And he used a particular brand of bitters that was available just down the road at a local pharmacy owned by another gentleman called Antoine Peychaud, who is now famous for Peychaud's bitters. So it's kind of a number of different things all going on at the same time. A bar owner who wanted to get into cocktails, a man who was importing cognac into New Orleans, and another gentleman who was creating a brand of aromatic bitters called Peychaud's. And because New Orleans had such a sort of French colony vibe going on to it, absinthe was also an important part of the cocktail. So what I'm going to do is make two versions of this drink. The first version is the first published recipe of this cocktail, which was in Bill Boothby's cocktail book of 1908, a lot later on. Now, he claims to have been given the recipe directly from the man called Thomas Handy. So we'll see how it goes. I don't know. The interesting thing about this drink, the original recipe from Bill Boothby, is that it's supposed to be mixed in a rocks glass and then decanted into another rocks glass, which I always found a little bit strange. Right, why not use a mixing beaker? So I'm just going to pour a little bit of absinthe into this glass here. And as is kind of the way. We just give it a swirl around, we'll coat on the inside, I'll let that sit there. And the other glass I've got here, we're going to add some sugar. In actual fact, Bill Boothby's recipe calls for crushed sugar, to crush it with the Peychaud's, but I haven't got enough time or patience to be waiting for sugar to dissolve. So 3 dashes of Peychaud's bitters, and then 50 ml of cognac. So we'll just give that a little stir. Stirring in this glass, it's like a klaxon sounding or something, you know? And discard any excess absinthe we might have in here. Strain it out. And then it's just garnished with a twist of lemon. There's some debate as to whether or not the lemon should actually be twisted or just popped in the drink. So we've probably all had a Sazerac before, right? And it's probably made roughly along the lines of that recipe, yeah? So an absinthe washed glass, your Peychaud's, a little bit of sugar, and cognac. Often we choose to make it with rye instead, and in actual fact, Boothby's recipe, published in 1908, called for good whiskey, which at the time, most likely probably would have been rye. There's a reason for that, and Dave's already alluded to it. The phylloxera sort of epidemic, if you like, on the grapevines of Europe. Cognac became very hard to get hold of at the end of the 19th century, and so as a result of that, cocktails published at the beginning of the 20th century will often omit cognac for something like whiskey, Scotch, bourbon, rye, anything else they can get their hands on that might sort of attempt to achieve that. But cognac is the original drink. You know, you get Sazerac rye now. It's based on a cognac. It seems bizarre. So if you've got some straws here, welcome to just pass that around and taste it if you'd like to. So I'm going to make a modern version of it now that I believe brings out the cognac a little bit more. It does a little bit more in favour of the cognac, if you like. And the reason for that is that it kind of separates cognac and the absinthe elements, so you get 2 different sort of stages to the drink when you're drinking it, if you like. So it's made in much the same way, but instead of... I'm just going to use some of this hand-cracked ice here that the Savoy guys have kindly left for me. If you kind of imagine we're going to remove the absinthe rinse from the equation. I'm going to make 2 of these. Remove the absinthe rinse from the equation and instead place the absinthe on top of the drink in the form of an air. I'll show you how to make that now. Peychaud's, sugar. So it's a VSOP cognac I'm using. Give that a stir down. Now, what I've got here is absinthe mixed with water and a touch of lecithin, which is a foaming agent. And that's a portable fish tank pump. So what we do is we turn the fish tank pump on, allow the airs to bubble through the mixture, and what will happen is the bubbles will hold, they'll stay stable, which is brilliant because it means we can actually use it, pile it on top of a drink, do whatever we like with it, like so. There's really only a tiny amount of liquid in there. You know, probably less absinthe than there would be if I was to, you know, rinse the glass. But it's enough to look visually quite cool, and it affects the palate. But crucially, more than anything, is I'm separating the cognac element, this bit, out from the absinthe element of the drink. So each sip will be different. Some might taste a little bit more absinthe, if that is a word, and some might taste, you know, more of cognac. You'll get more of the bottom of the drink. We'll literally just spoon that on top. And I'm serving it in a silver egg cup. The reason for that is that the original Sazerac drink was thought to have been served in egg cups. Antoine Peychaud, who invented the bitters, used to dispense medicine sometimes in tiny little egg cups, French egg cups called cocotiers. And so I wanted to kind of make that historical reference back to that original cognac drink. Differences between this and a rye-based Sazerac? Well, rye obviously has that spice to it. Naturally, rye produces a spicy distillate. Whereas cognac's softer, it has more of those fruit characteristics. Obviously depends on the cognac you're using. But that's what I want in my Sazerac. I want some of that, grapefruit to come, not grapefruit, but grape as a fruit to come through. And there we go. This drink only really works if you sip it, so you're going to have to get unhygienic if you want to pass it around and share it. There's one. Set that thing off again. Cool. So that's the Green Fairy Sazerac. And yeah, if you've got a beard, you might be in trouble.
You'd kind of Sazerac beard guards, I think, available in the chat, I'm quite sure. Fantastic looking drink. So we'll get some feedback in a wee while about these two. Let's kind of just finish off that kind of early history of cognac, bring it up to the start of today's market, and really concentrate a little bit on what Tristan was just saying there about what was happening in cognac around about the 1870s. Everything was going well. It was the golden age of cognac. Things were progressing beautifully. It was highly prestigious. It was beginning to be exported out with its main markets into Asia, etc. Exports to Japan were starting up towards the end of the 19th century. But then phylloxera struck, the vine louse phylloxera, which sucks all the sap, basically kills the vines. It arrived in the cognac area in 1872. By 1877, all the vines in cognac were dead. All the vines in the whole of France were virtually dead, wiped out completely because of this louse. What the French rebuilt or replanted, they grafted their vines onto American phylloxera-resistant rootstock and started all over again. But when people in cognac started again, things had changed. So if you look at your map of cognac these days, it's really what happened, what was planted after phylloxera had hit. It's the replanted map of cognac. The vineyard area actually shrunk considerably after phylloxera. Production levels dropped fairly substantially. The other thing which happened, which was significant as far as flavour went, was that the old grape variety, which was used predominantly up until phylloxera, was one called Folle Blanche. You still get Folle Blanche now, but it's a lesser planted grape variety. In its place was planted Uni Blanc or Saint-Emilion. That is more disease resistant. It produces slightly different aromatics as well. So the character of cognac changes pre-phylloxera to post-phylloxera. Now, if you're lucky enough to go across the cognac and you kind of sidle up to one of the great cellar masters and they're very nice and flatter them greatly, they may actually open a cask or a demijohn, more likely, of some pre-phylloxera cognac. We had that experience at Frappin when Olivier Pault did it. Wonderful, heady, rich, powerful, evocative. Very, very different. Not only because of its age, but simply because of its aromatic compounds that were coming through. A much more floral and a slightly heavier style. Post that, a lighter, more delicate cognac begins to be made. More fragrant top notes coming through. A more graceful, maybe a cognac with slightly more finesse. That's up to debate. Well, we're talking about flavour. Let's really kind of drill down into what the flavours of cognac are. You've got two glasses in front of you. On the left is a VSOP, on the right is an XO. VSOP and XO are designations of rough age. A VSOP can be a minimum of 4 years old. In practice, most VSOPs are considerably older. XO can be 6 years old, but in practice will be considerably older. These are produced for the BNIC, so they're not coming from a particular merchant. These are just very, very good examples of the style of a VSOP and the style of an XO. It's a good way to try and get head around what the aromas and what the flavours of cognac are. If you want to try more cognacs, nip round the corner. The BNIC have a wonderful stand there. There's lots of great brands on show. a moving feast of brands, so you can have a lot of fun. So let's have a quick look at our VSOP. Lovely kind of bright amber colour. I'm always told when I go to cognac, you never swirl in cognac. You just have to have it sitting there and put your nose in the glass. Sorry, I'm an uncivilized Glaswegian. I like swirling my cognac. Sorry if that offends anybody. It can really open up the aromas a lot more. I get some lovely soft fruit emerging here, little bits of honey. It's quite ripe, it's quite concentrated. Little touch of ginger just begins to develop, and a distinct citric note as well. And it has that distinctly cognac note. You know, it's not a grain spirit. It doesn't have that dry graininess. It has a vinous quality, a softness, a gentleness to it. As it begins to open, so you see little hints of vanilla beginning to develop. Then on the palate, very soft, very sweet, very smooth. The fruits are more kind of red fruit for me, not really black fruit, more kind of red fruit. Also a little bit of quince beginning to develop. Hint of lime is more kind of distinct limey note on that citrus character. The finish is kind of medium length, it's long, and it's sweet. Sorry, Tristan is standing there looking like an abandoned puppy dog because I didn't give him a glass. So that was the VSOP. Going to move on to the XO. You can immediately see from the colour, this is darker. There's no caramel addition going on here. This is darker, it's spent more time in the cask. This seems to be deeper. This kind of invites you in a little bit more. It's not as effusive as that VSOP. There's more kind of chocolate, maybe a hint of leather beginning to develop. The fruits, rather than being the red fruit, which I was picking up on that VSOP, are moving into kind of hedgerow fruit, the more kind of black fruit that's beginning to develop. It's still sweet, this kind of melted caramel toffee beginning to develop as well. And then a taste. Broader on the tongue, richer, seems to sit in the middle of the tongue a little bit more. Spicier as well, more maybe cumin and coriander coming through. The fruit is cooked, that kind of dark fruit, like making jam. Then thick honey, like chestnut honey. The finish is longer and softer, much more gentle going down the back of the throat. Ripe and relatively powerful as well. Very, very good examples of cognac. But where are these flavours coming from? Now, we decided we were too lazy to actually get slides and stuff. So I'm sorry you have to look at this all the way through this. But you know, we could have had the big map of cognac up there, the map that probably you're all quite familiar with all the various crews of cognac identified in that little bullseye of the different regions within cognac. And we could talk about that, and we could talk about the soil. You know, how Grand Champagne and Petit Champagne are very chalk-rich. Borderie is clay, that Fines-Bois, light clay and a little bit of chalk. Bonbois, very heavy clay, and Bois d'Honneur, where there really isn't any vines anymore, to be perfectly honest, but it's still part of the appellation, is very sandy. And that could be the end of the lecture. But you see, the terroir exists. Don't get me wrong, I believe in the terroir of cognac, but there's always exceptions to the rule. I mean, if Tristan and I were rich enough, which we certainly aren't, to be able to buy a vineyard in the Grand Champagne, and we planted some vines, and then just harvested them, we wouldn't automatically make a great cognac. Cognac doesn't make itself. Just because the vines are in a good place doesn't mean the wine is going to be good, doesn't mean the cognac's going to be good. The one element of terroir that's often overlooked is the hand of man himself, or herself. Because it's human intervention that makes cognac special. And that's what I really want to have more of a concentrated look at. And also, because of these exceptions, you know, poor old Fines-Bois always gets overlooked. There's some phenomenal sites in Fines-Bois, which happen to be chalky as well. So don't just dismiss them because they're not a famous name or a famous appellation. And cognac isn't just cognac. There's so many different aspects to it. You could have single growers. single vineyard cognacs if you want. Or you could have merchant houses. The merchant houses will be drawing from more than one grower, more than one appellation, more than one cru. They'll be blending it to suit their style. So immediately begin to see that there's the independent grower, or the grower's cognacs, and then there's the houses. It's not right or wrong, it's not better or worse, it's just different. So let's have this little look at flavour. You've got the grape variety, so we'll look at Uni Blanc, a little bit about a little Fall Blanche as well. You get aromas and flavours from that grape. Yes, you're going to get fruitiness, you're going to get grapiness, that's a given. But also the haunting aroma of vine flower, or what the French would call linden blossom, you know, which we don't often kind of smell linden blossom over here. It's quite a continental smell. But if you smell privet, you know, like privet hedges, it's very similar to that. So you get that, you get violet from the grapes as well, especially from Borderie. You get geranium, you get grassiness, you get some green leafy characters as well. That's just from the grape itself. Those aromatics are more full-bodied in Fall Blanche and lighter in Uni Blanc. And they are a result of the terroir. But then you take these grapes and you crush them and you add yeast and you ferment them. And when you ferment them, you get different aromas getting added onto this. You get aromas like rose or banana, other fruits, pears, peaches, pineapples. Suddenly, it's beginning to develop. Suddenly, you get more aromas getting laid on the top of it. But we haven't finished yet, because all we've done is made a wine. We've fermented it dry. You have to ferment it dry, because if you distill wine with sugar in it, the sugar is going to, is that you? Is that me? The sugar is going to stick to the side of the still and give you burnt aromas. Is that better? Yeah, that's better. It's this one. So, you're going to be distilling. And when you're distilling, you are concentrating the flavours that you've made. You're going to be enhancing some. That rosa one, for example, which will be picked up if you cut much later in your second distillation, or those violet notes which come across later as well. That really intense leafy green banana thing will be coming across much earlier. So if you want that, you cut slightly earlier. You can distill with lees, i.e. the wine is still cloudy, if you want a richer, heavier cognac for long-term aging. Or you can distill without lees, if you want it more delicate for earlier drinking. Lots and lots of different opportunities. And still you haven't finished, because all you've made is a spirit. All you've made is eau de vie. You've still got to age it. So you're going to put it in new casks. The new casks made of French oak are going to be giving you oak lactone. You're going to be notes of vanilla, little burnt notes, cocoa as well. But then you're going to take it out of those casks after 2 or 3 years, because you don't want a big impact of all that wood. You're going to put it in older casks and allow oxidation to take place. And at that point, more deeper, concentrated, thicker, fruitier aromas begin to develop. And as you leave it longer and longer, so everything begins to decay in the cask, the fatty acids begin to break down, and you get this wonderful evocative scent, which is called rancio. Rancio smells of leather and mushrooms and blue cheese. It's very, very haunting. All of that is coming from a bunch of grapes. Now that's pretty weird. That's pretty exciting. As I said, earlier this year, we were over with the BNIC at their annual summit. And one year, the summit devised this rather fantastic flavour wheel, which you've all got a copy of. Another year, they invented a cocktail called the Summit. And this year, we were over there trying to work out whether you could measure pleasure. And we came to the fairly quick conclusion that, no, you couldn't measure pleasure. It was a bit like trying to catch a ghost. But what we did in that week or so was actually really concentrate on what was happening in the mouth, what was happening when we tasted the cognac, the persistence of the flavour, the way in which different flavours arose and fell away on the tongue. And that's really important in tasting spirits. So those of you who have talked to before know I always bang on about this, but how every great spirit does an arc of information. It's like a story. You start off in one point, you end up in another. It's a seamless evolution of flavour, not just one thing. Flavours rise and fall, other ones emerge as you go through. Texture is also vitally important as well. Texture, I would argue, not as a barman, trust me, I'm no barman, but texture is very important when you're making mixed drinks, because you're quite often using ice. You're chilling things down, so you're killing off aroma initially. But when you take it in the mouth and it warms up in your mouth, what you begin to get is all these flavors beginning to emerge, and also always the feel of the spirit. So texture is very, very important. And a kind of couple of stories about what happened when we were over there. One remarkable night, we were down at Remy Martin's Domaine de Groix, where they keep the casks, where the blend of Louis XIII is kept for 4 years before it is then bottled. And we tasted some from the cask. And the way we tasted it was fairly extraordinary. And it's the way I taste spirits really now. Rather than take a big glug of it, which is my natural inclination being a Scotsman, just take a tiny little sip of it and just allow those flavours to develop and flow across the tongue. This was extraordinary because what I was getting, I'll read you some of the notes here. Rain-sodden lily of the valley, jasmine, like coats caught in a furrier's cupboard, cigar smoke, concentrated fruits, spices. All in all, the sense of time. You really got an idea of time. You really got an idea of how old these cognacs were. This was like a kind of temporal missile coming across. You could see everything flashing through your mind about what had happened to this spirit all the way through the 20th century, wars and famines and good times and bad times. That is what the blenders are working with. That is the raw material that they are working with in cognac. That is why it is special. And each of these growers, each of these producers has their own particular take on it. So you could go to somewhere like Frappin and try some of theirs, which are very long and very elegant. Lots of kind of rosemary and cocoa nibs and lots of honeysuckle come through in Frappin for me. Hennessy, Vetiver, Prune, Cigar Humidors. Hennessy makes big, bold cognacs. Courvoisier, lighter and sharper, but in its essence, which is its oldest one, lots of animalic notes coming through. Tropical fruits and waxiness in Martel. And so it goes on. The kind of muskiness of Gabrielson, the lift of Lérat, the wonderful elegance and subtlety and length and complexity of Delamant, which you can taste down there. But it's not all about size and power and richness. You can have delicacy as well. You get something like the Lérat 6-year-old, which could well be on the eau de vie stand there, where you do pick up that vine flower I was talking about ages, that white fruit and the lime, which comes right from the beginning, right from the grape. Or Gourmel's Premier Saveur, which is whispering and fragrant. In other words, cognac isn't just cognac. Cognac is a range of different flavors, which can be used in a whole raft of different ways. It is a classic spirit. And for a classic spirit, let's now have a classic cocktail. A sidecar.
Nice. That was brilliant, by the way. Really good.
Thank you.
Kind of brought back a lot of memories of when we were in Cognac, actually, in the Paradis at Remy, and it really was a very special moment. One that, this guy here visits tons of distilleries and aging facilities all over the world. I've done my fair share as well, but that was really something special when we were there. It was a real poignant moment. Sorry? Yeah, there you go, exactly. Yeah, really special. So, and not only that, but we had dinner in the still house as well, which was insane. Like, literally in front of the stills. Amazing. So, yeah, probably one of the most classic cognac cocktails if we're taking the Sazerac out of the equation, which, as I already mentioned, is often considered to be a rye drink. The sidecar. So, moving on through our kind of progression, we're now into the 1920s. So, the sidecar, it's probably the first cognac cocktail I ever made, actually. Really simple. Cognac, triple sec, orange, curacao, and lemon juice. Combination of the three. Now, this drink was invented in 1922 by Harry Macalone at the Ritz in Paris. And it was first published in his book of that year, Harry's ABC of Cocktails, which is kind of one of those classic staple books, pre-Savoy cocktail book. It was probably one of the best around. His recipe, unfortunately, his original recipe, is rubbish. Because it's equal parts cognac, lemon juice, triple sec. So the drink comes out really flabby. Now, I was going to make it for you to taste, just for the hell of it, but just trust me, it's not that good. So I'm going to make the Savoy version of it, which was, instead of being equal parts cognac, triple sec, lemon juice, it's 2 parts cognac, 1 part triple sec, 1 part lemon juice. Kind of like a margarita, basically, but with cognac. Now that drink works a lot better in my opinion. So I'm going to put one of them together for you now, and we'll have a little taste, get some feedback, see what you think. Then I'll make my kind of modern interpretation of the drink, which the other ones are more about theatre. We had the ice cream and the air and everything. This one's really about the careful and precise use of ingredients. Not that I didn't think about it a little bit for the others as well, but just chucked it all in there. Yeah, it's frozen. Eat it. It's got alcohol in, it's solid. The drink I'm going to make, really, I've kind of thought about it. There's a lot of homemade ingredients in there. I've been quite precise with the acids and sugars that I've used and stuff like that. But I'll come back to it and make the classic sidecar first. So, double measure of cognac. I'm just deciding whether to make 2 or not. No, I don't think I will. I don't think I've got enough lemon juice. That's right. 25 ml of lemon juice. Of course, there was a phase where people went through with putting a sugar rim on this drink, which we put a stop to that quite quickly because it was so naff, it was unbelievable. It's kind of going down that margarita route with the salt, but instead of putting salt, because salt and cognac don't go that well together with sugar. Really bizarre. And then just a little bit of triple sec, which is, got loads of unmarked bottles here. That's absinthe. That's triple sec. And then I'm just going to shake that up, strain it out. I'll do it to 2 glasses so you can kind of pass them around. Not the best ice in the world, by the way. There's absolutely no way you would have caught Harry Macklin double straining. So I'm going to go straight in there. Then, as I say, his recipe wasn't very good anyway. So, no garnish, straight up. Why is it called a sidecar? The story goes, I mean, we're talking just sort of post-World War I here. So you got a lot of those motorbikes with sidecars on. They were actually considered to be quite posh at the time. So a cocktail from the Ritz in Paris called the Sidecar did have an element of luxury to it, if you like. But the reason supposedly the reason it's called a sidecar is because when you drink it, it drives you away, it takes you away somewhere else. So I quite like that story, and that's what I'll go with. So I didn't even taste that, but what do we think? I mean, it is that simple 2-1-1 proportions. It's quite nice. Worth noting that David A. Emery, who wrote quite a famous cocktail book in the 1940s called The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks, also had a recipe for the sidecar, which I think is quite good, and that's 8-to-1 ratios. So it's very heavily in favour of the cognac, and it's more like a daiquiri, really, if you think about those proportions, but obviously with triple sec in place of sugar. So the bang up-to-date version that I'm going to make doesn't contain lemon juice, crucially. The reason for that is that I think the lemon juice tends to suffocate some of the other flavours that are coming through from the cognac and coming through from the triple sec as well. So what I did is I created my own triple sec. This was distilled with sort of orange zest, a few other just choice spices, but in very, very small quantities. And I used fructose to sweeten it. So same sort of sugars that are present within grapes, right? Then I've added acid to it. So I've kind of got the whole drink in 2 bottles here. My sweet and sour bit and my cognac. And the acid I used was tartaric acid, which is the acid that you get in grapes as well. So we're taking it back to the sort of where cognac starts with those grapes. You know, Dave's just gone through the whole journey from, if you like, field to glass, and this is where it starts. It's those grapes. And my aim was, with that particular type of acid and sugar, to actually try and accentuate, maybe bring back some of that grape flavour, because there's so much going on in there. We've had that fermentation process, we've had the distillation process that's pulled off different bits from the fermentation, we've We've had the aging process, which has again sort of softened some bits, added new flavors to other bits, affected other bits. And now I want to try and bring back some of that fruit from where we started. So, a nice bit of the Savoy ice in here. I'm not even going to shake it, I'm just going to stir it down. So if you think about it as like almost a sidecar old-fashioned. But it's quite surprising when you come to taste it because it's got an acidity to it. It's quite bright, it's quite fresh still. So it's still got that kind of sidecar aperitif style, if you like. A touch more. And, you know, when we talk about flavor perception and things like that, this drink here, I mean, it looks like it consists entirely of maybe wine and spirit or bitters and spirit, but there's that freshness in there. And so it's playing tricks on our palate, if you like, when we come to taste it. So that acidity doesn't need to be as great as it would in a sour cocktail, let's say, because it's going to be such a shock when you come to drink it and find that it's acidic already. And that, for me, my role as a bartender has been like that for the last couple of years. It's been trying to kind of play with perception and affect flavour through that. And I think that's what every bartender does, really, whether they know it or not. I'm just going to put one little lump of ice in there as well, because I personally believe that putting ice in coupes is really cool at the moment. So it's just me. And I've got a nice, just dehydrated orange slice there as well to finish it off. Have you still got some straws left, or have they all gone? Cool. If you'd like to pass that one around. So, as I say, we've got tartaric acid in there, grape acid, if you like, fructose sugar, and then an orange distillate with a simple, neutral spirit base. And that's kind of the homemade triple sec, and then along with a VSOP cognac, the modern sidecar. Yeah, good. It's quite a shock, isn't it, when you come to taste it, because you don't expect that brightness, if you like. But for me, it pulls out some of those particular characteristics of a VSOP, brings out some of that freshness, and it kind of takes it back to bright kind of fruit aromatics, And without the lemon juice in there, we're not getting all those kind of citric flavours that are overpowering the flavour of the cognac. Don't get me wrong, the sidecar as a classic drink is a great cocktail, but if I want to accentuate cognac, then you've got to drop down some of these other overriding flavours that really kind of soften characteristics of the cognac.
Good. So, just kind of in conclusion then, cognac kind of lost its cool, really. Like all brown spirits, like whiskey, like rum, etc., etc. All the way through the really 1970s, 1980s, people kind of stopped drinking cognac, apart from the Asian market. And then 1990s, the Asian market collapses, and they stopped drinking cognac as well. It was considered ridiculously old-fashioned. The bottles, it was becoming too expensive. It was becoming too elite. It kind of lost touch with its roots, should you say. Something quite interesting has happened in cognac in the region over the past few years. Simply because sales were going down, production was still actually relatively high, very similar to what happened in Scotch whisky, to be honest. That a lot of the big houses simply didn't need all the cognac that they were buying in from these small growers. And as a result of that, many more of these small growers were initially forced to go independent, to actually start not just distilling themselves, but then marketing and bottling their own cognacs from their own reserves and from the stuff that they were making. It was probably the best thing that could have happened, to be perfectly honest, because it opened up the cognac market once more. It's a whole new range of smaller producers, often incredibly well priced, which really offer a phenomenal idea of how rich and how varied the cognac map and the flavour map of cognac actually is. And also because sales were going down, the big boys decided they had to do something as well. They were initially saved by Busta Rhymes. You know, there was the great, you know, pass the Courvoisier, if that was Busta Rhymes. You know, so XO Cognac really took off in the United States because of rap music, because of, you know, it was Cristal champagne, it was vodka, and it was XO Cognac. But these days, now that that boom's actually begun to kind of fall off once more, what you're beginning to see is it's almost a more serious cognac beginning to emerge, but it's not a serious cognac in the way that it used to be serious. It used to be serious and slightly snobbish. These days, it's serious as far as quality goes, but incredibly approachable, because what the cognac producers, and this is one thing that we found when we were going around all these producers, the cognac producers are so proud of what they do, and these days really want to talk about flavour, about what the flavour is, how they can use the flavour. When I started going to cognac 20 years ago, you know, people even adding ginger ale to cognac was frowned upon. Now you go into any house and they'll be talking about adding fruit juices or tonic water, which doesn't work that well, but ginger ale or cocktails. The field has opened up as far as they are concerned. And it's beginning to open up as far as bartenders all around the world is concerned. I was reading something that Dick Bradsell said, it was quoted in Nick Facebook, which was, cognac is kind of, and I'll paraphrase what Dick said, cognac's actually not a bad position, because it wasn't one of the spirits behind all the really, really naff cocktails that came out. It kind of missed all that by. So it can fall back on all these classics that can be reinterpreted by you guys, and as Tristan has showed phenomenally well today. So there's a re-evaluation going on in cognac. I would urge you to go and try it. Don't just think cognac is cognac, it's cognac. Don't just look at one big brand. Look at a number of big brands and look at these smaller producers as well. It's a rich field to start exploring, full of flavours and full of opportunities, as we've seen today. Thank you very much indeed.